occasionally I'll have someone ask me, what Vim plugins are you using? What are you doing in your Vim config? So I thought, why don't I just do a general overview of what I'm actually using? Now, I'm not going to be going in depth into every single line of my Vim config. That would be a big waste of everyone's time. What I'm going to do instead is go over the general important things. Obviously, we'll talk about every single plugin I'm using and why I'm using it, but I'm not going to go into like the configuration for each of the plugins. If you want to go see stuff like that, then go check out the individual videos I've done on most of the plugins, or, you know, just go and have a read through the config yourself and have a look at the help pages for the individual plugins. I've got everything labeled in sections, so it should be fairly easy to actually find stuff. So, over on my main screen here, I've got a Vim buffer open, but let's actually go and open up my nvim config. So if you don't know, I'm using nvim and not regular Vim. I've got my reasons for doing so, just mainly because a lot of the newer plugins are built specifically with nvim in mind. There's a lot of stuff I want to test that only works in nvim. I don't know of anything that is the other way around, at least for the modern stuff. There used to be things that only worked in regular Vim and didn't work in NeoVim, but most things at this point, if there is a difference between the two, will usually just be working in NeoVim. So off to the left here, I've got a file tree. So this file tree, it's not nerd tree anymore. I used to use nerd tree in the past, but now it is just net tree. So net tree is the file tree built into Vim. So I felt like if it's built into Vim, why don't I just use that? Now, the problem with net tree is it's a bit more minimal than you get with things like nerd tree. So out of the box, it's not that nice to use, especially if you are used to using nerd tree. If you're not used to using it, you can probably accept some of the weird stuff that net tree actually does. So if we go down to one of the net tree functions I've written, so I've got actually a bunch of functions involving net tree just to make it so it feels a bit more like using nerd tree without all of the other garbage that nerd tree has that I don't actually use. So the main function I use is this function right here, so toggle net tree. So what toggle net tree does, I'm not going to pretend like I understand any of this Vim script in here. I can tell you what it does, but basically I just got this off of Stack Overflow. Pretty much what it does is it's a toggle between net tree being on and net tree being off, because net tree doesn't actually have a method to handle toggling. When you go and create a new net tree buffer, what it's going to do is create a new net tree buffer. There's no way to say, okay, I have one open, I want to then go and close that. So this function right here is basically doing that. And this function is basically also being run every single time I open up a new Vim buffer. So if I just go and show you that, open up Vim, as you can see, net tree automatically gets opened up. And that is being handled by this function right here. So basically it's checking if net tree exists, and then if it does exist, it's just going to call toggle net tree, and that gets called when I actually enter Vim by this line right here. So pretty straightforward how that actually works. Now, as for opening up new files from this net tree window, by default what it's going to try to do is actually put the window in the actual split that net tree was actually in. Now, I don't like this because it's going to create a very small split, so what I'd prefer to do is do what nerd tree does. If I just press capital H on this, as you can see, it opens up a horizontal split in this section right here. And then let's open up another one. So let's open up a vertical split. And if we do this, as you can see, it opens up a vertical split over here rather than trying to vertically split the net tree window itself. And this is basically just being handled by a hack. It's not actually a good bit of Vim script. Basically, with these functions right here, so open to the right, open below, and open tab. Pretty straightforward what they do. Open to the right is going to, make a vertical split to the right. Open below is going to make a horizontal split below. And then open tab is going to open up a tab. Now, pretty much what I'm doing is I'm opening up the file in the regular mode. So if I just go and actually press V on a file, so let's go find something, I don't know, bash RC or something, or bash history, that'll work. So if I press V on a file, as you can see, this is what it normally looks like if I open up a vertical split from net tree. Now, this obviously isn't very usable, so what I do is when I've opened up that file, I go and get the path to the file, I quit out of this buffer here, right? Then I go and open up a new split with that file path and then just move over to that split. Obviously not the best way to do it, but it does give me the result that I want to see. So moving up the file a bit, I just have a couple of regular auto commands. So these aren't things that are related to a plugin, these are just regular vanilla Vim things. So there's not really that much too interesting in here, except for this line right here. So insert enter norm ZZ. So what does this actually do? Well, if you've watched my videos before, you might notice that when I go into insert mode, my cursor gets centered. Now, you might not like this functionality. I really do like it though, so when I found out that I could do this, I absolutely loved it. So if you don't know, pressing ZZ is going to basically just center your cursor on the screen. And I have that running every single time that I go into insert mode, just so I can have the cursor, you know, on the center of the screen. I just find it easier to find the cursor. Now, another thing that might be interesting to you is a couple of my standard vanilla Vim bindings. So these two right here are actually really useful. So by default, when you try to go and, you know, visual block select something and then change the indentation of it, after changing at one level, you're going to lose the visual block selection. These two lines right here basically just go and fix that. So now I can just indent as much as I want without actually losing the visual block. And I honestly use this functionality tons. I don't know how often I use it. I use it pretty much every time I'm trying to use Vim. Now, another one that is useful are these ones right here. So by default, moving between splits in Vim is more annoying than it really needs to be. So if I want to actually go over to this split here, I have to do Control W L Y, Control W H. Why do I need to do that? Why can't I just say, okay, I want to go over here. I want to go over here. So I've got it set to Alt L is just going to run Control W and then L, or Alt K is going to run Control W K. It just makes it way easier to move around, and the Alt keys in Vim are generally going to be pretty free to work with. Most plugins don't touch them, and I don't believe that vanilla Vim uses them for anything that isn't on some other sort of like control binding or separate other bindings. So it's pretty safe to actually just go and rebind everything under the Alt keys. Now, another thing you might notice is I have mouse control enabled. Now, you might not like mouse control. Personally, I find it easier for working on videos. Generally, I don't really use it when I'm just editing most of the time, but when I'm trying to make a video, it's usually easier to just point at something and say, this is what I'm talking about, rather than trying to navigate my cursor over there, because I occasionally will forget the key bindings to move around, and it's just easier to, you know, click around like this if I'm trying to talk with my hands anyway. So the way you go and enable that is set mouse equals A. Now, this really depends on which terminal you're using. In Alacrity, it does have mouse support, but there's a lot of other terminals out there where this either won't work or will only work in a minimal capacity. If you've seen my previous videos on Vim, you've probably been able to work out that I'm a pretty big fan of Vim plugins, so I have quite a few of them. Most of them don't do that much, but they are all really useful for what I'm actually doing with my system. So the first one we're going to go over is COC, which adds in code completion. Now, if you don't know what I mean by code completion, let's just go over here and actually create a new file. Let's call it, I don't know, test.js or something like that. And let's try to write out a JavaScript function. So there's a function in JavaScript called console. As you can see, as I start writing stuff out, it starts, you know, showing me what I can actually include. So console dot, and as you can see, there's this list here. I can say I want to use console.log, console.timelog, console.clear. The one I'm looking at is log. So if I go and press enter on this, that will then go and complete that. And then it shows me what I can actually pass into that function. And I've got this working for a bunch of different languages. JavaScript is just the one that I chose now. I've got it for things like HTML, TypeScript. I can do it on C, C++, Java, Rust, whatever language that I actually want to use. Now, I know that in the past, people didn't use code completion, but once you have code completion, getting rid of it will make you so much less efficient. So most of the stuff with COC is going to be boilerplate. And as you're going to see, I don't even know what most of it does. This is just the default configuration from the COC GitHub page. So I didn't bother changing, I think, most of this. So I don't really see any point of going over that. Now, the thing I did change is this right here. So obviously, Vim has plugins, but so does COC. So in COC, I have the plugins snippets, which basically lets me add code snippets in, pairs, which let me do things like this. So if I do, say, quote marks, or I do apostrophes, or I do brackets, or I do like square brackets, or I do braces. Basically, it lets me do, you know, pairs of those. And then the rest of these are just language servers. So actually, no, Pretty is not a language server. Pretty, basically what that does is when I go and save a file, it's just going to change the formatting just to make it so it looks prettier. So if I do things like have misplaced brackets or, I don't know, weirdly spaced text, basically what that's going to do is just go and make the document look prettier. Obviously, this isn't required, but it is nice to have there, especially if you're going to be working with other people. You don't want to give them your really ugly looking code, and honestly, it makes it a bit easier to work with if all your code is formatted in the exact same way. And then the rest of these are just language servers. So the TypeScript server that adds TypeScript completion, HTML, CSS, JSON. You don't necessarily need this one, but it does add a couple of nice things for working with JSON. We have Angular and also Vimtex. Now, Vimtex is for LaTeX. And then if I wanted to add support for C or Java, I'll just add in the language servers for those specific languages. So let's go back up to the plugin block and just kind of rapid fire a lot of the other stuff I have going. So up the top here, we have Vim Airline. Basically, that is how I'm doing this bar down the bottom here. So basically, it's just showing a bunch of useful information about the document. So it shows what mode I'm in. Right now, I'm in normal mode. If I press I go into insert mode. And then next to that, we have the number of lines that have been modified inside of the Git repo. So this file right here is contained in the Git repo. So as you can see, it has 23 added lines, 8 modified lines, and 30 removed lines. It shows me what branch I'm on. It shows me the file name. It shows me the file type, the encoding type, how far I am through the document, and some other useful things about the document as well. Basically, it just makes it easier to see this information without having to go and just query for it in other ways. For example, I don't really want to have to query for, how far I am through the document. It's much easier to see, okay, this document has 445 lines and I'm on the 105th line, which is 23% of the way through the document. Now, you might not find that useful, but I found myself using this pretty frequently. And then the next one we have is the Airline Themes. Pretty much that's just letting me set this theme down here. And then the next one is Vim Codec. That is just the general theme that I'm using for the rest of my editor. So for both the actual editor itself and also Vim Airline, I am using Codec. So Codec is my color scheme. So I like the VS Code color scheme. I don't really care what anyone else thinks about that. It is objectively the best color scheme ever made. So yeah, I'm going to keep using it. Then next up, we have some syntax highlighting stuff. So basically the reason why you install syntax highlighting plugins is because the default way that Vim does syntax highlighting, it works, but for some languages, the way they're structured, it's not perfect. So for example, in TypeScript, it does some weird things to functions and some weird things to variables because the way they're laid out is a little bit different to the way that Vim does highlighting by default. So basically these plugins just go and fix all of that. So we have the TypeScript one, we have Vim.js, which is better highlighting for JavaScript. We have Vim.jsx Pretty. That basically makes it so the React JSX stuff is going to be highlighted properly. And then I also have the Rust one, which is not just syntax highlighting, it also does some other stuff. I don't know why I have that. I haven't done any Rust at all, so I don't know why I installed that, but that is for Rust code. Maybe I'm going to do some Rust at some point and then forgot about it. I don't know. Anyway, next up we have Vim Easy Motion. Now, previously I was using Vim Sneak. However, Easy Motion kind of encapsulates everything that Vim Sneak does and then everything more. So if you didn't watch my video on Easy Motion, basically it lets me do things like, say, space, and then press K, and then jump to any line that's visible on my screen. So I could jump up to line J, or I could do, say, space, W, and then jump to a word. So I could jump to this word right here by pressing JL, or I could jump to, say, I don't know, space, F, and then it's going to prompt me for a character. So let's say we want to jump to a J. As you can see, that then goes and highlights all of the J's, and I can say jump to this J down here by pressing D. Basically, it's just adding a way to move around a bit easier inside of Vim. Obviously, you don't necessarily need it, but I find it a bit easier to use than just the regular Vim motions. So I also have two Git-related plugins. The first one I have is Vim Git Gutter. Basically, what that is doing is this thing off to the side here. So basically, this is like a gutter, and it has these pluses, tildes, and minus in here. So the pluses represent lines that were added compared to the version of the document that exists in the Git repo. This represents that it was modified, and this represents that it was deleted. So basically, it just gives me an idea of what has actually been happening in this document compared to the one that has last been committed. And also, these numbers down the bottom here have also been added by Git Gutter as well. So the reason why I use Airline specifically as my bar down here is because Airline actually integrates with a bunch of other plugins out of the box. A lot of the other ones you have to kind of write the integrations yourself. Airline, the integrations already exist, so just install the plugin and it's automatically going to work. So that's why I like using this. I could write them myself with a different line plugin, but if it's going to be the exact same result, I might as well just use Airline. Now, the second one I have is Vim Fugitive. Basically, this is going to make it so much easier to actually run Git commands while you're actually inside of Vim. Now, this file is half in a Git repo and half out, so I can run some Git commands. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. If I just run the capital G command, it's going to open up this like Git status thing. But technically, I'm not actually in a Git repo because this file is actually a symlink. So if I try to run something like git add, that won't work because this file is a symlink, but I've technically opened it up from my home directory. So for some reason, some of the Git commands work, but other ones don't. So I'm going to open up a actual file inside of a Git repo. So if I just do g add dot and then do g commit, basically it lets me, commit directly inside of Vim without having to open up a different window. And there's a bunch of other things like this as well. Go watch my video that I actually did on Fugitive. Honestly, I think that this plugin just makes it so much easier to actually use Git while you're actually working with Vim. And if you're programming, you're going to be using Git a lot of the time, so you might as well just make it as easy as possible. Now, I also have some plugins for working with tags, and when I say tag, I'm generally referring to HTML tags, but I'm including JSX tags in this as well. So the first one I have is Vim Close Tag, which is pretty straightforward what that does. Basically, if I go and write something like, say, H2, and then I was to close this off in an HTML document or a JavaScript document, basically it will then go and create the other side of that, which I've done that wrong, but you kind of get the point. Basically, it's going to go and create the second half of the actual tag itself. And the next one I have is Vim Surround. Basically, this isn't just for working with tags. I typically only use it for tags though, but it also lets me do things like, say, delete surrounding apostrophes or change surrounding apostrophes to quotes. Basically, it lets me modify and delete surrounding elements. Or I can change these, say, so change surrounding quotes to a tag, and then change it to something like H2. Basically, it lets me modify stuff like that. I don't use this one a ton, but when I need it, it is really useful to have. And speaking of things that are really useful to have, Emmett Vim. Emmett is an absolutely essential plugin for doing any sort of front-end web development. So basically it lets me do things like this. So I could say I want a div that has a child, that is a paragraph, that has a child, that is a another paragraph, that has a child, that is a H1. So I can then actually go and generate a tree from this without having to go and write out these tags myself. So if I do Alt-C and then comma, basically it goes and generates all of that for me. Basically, it just makes it so much easier to write an HTML document that I can't see any reason not to be using this. Okay, so I only have a few plugins left, and the best way to categorize this section is as the miscellaneous section. So the first one I have is Fcf.Vim. So if you've ever used the Fcf application, basically this is just a wrapper that brings that into Vim. So this gives me another way to search for files. This time, instead of using a file tree, I'm using a fuzzy finder. So if I press Alt-Z, that will then go and open that up, and I can go and search for a file like, say, bed. So bed is an application I reviewed recently, which is a bash text editor. So I can go and open this up, and if I had actually saved this file, it would then go and replace this file with the file I tried to open. Pretty straightforward how that works. Now, the next one I have is Goyo. Goyo basically adds a sort of reading mode into Vim. I don't use this a ton, but occasionally when I'm working on things like reports, I want a less distracting view of my Vim window. So if I do space G, or if you've changed my leader key, it would just be leader G. Basically, it goes and hides all of the interface and just leaves me with the basic bit of text in here. So I don't get line numbers, I don't get the bar down the bottom, I don't really get anything, I just get the text that I'm trying to read and I'm trying to work on. Going back into the regular mode then, I also have a plugin for working with colors. So this is Vim Hexokinase. So if I write out, say, red, it actually shows me the color red. Or if I write out cyan, or if I write out FF44EE, it's going to show me this pink. Or if I go and put any number of other colors in there, it's just going to show me what that color actually is. Now you might say, what's the point of that? Well, if you're saying what the point of that is, you haven't ever tried to do CSS in Vim. And being able to see the colors directly inside the document makes it so much easier to work with colors, so you don't have to go back and forth between the website and the CSS document. You can say, okay, well, this is what this color is supposed to be. What's it going to look like on the website? You're not trying to guess exactly what the color is. You know what the color looks like. You're just trying to work out if it actually works with the colors you're trying to use. And then we have Vim Wiki. Now, this plugin, I could get rid of every other Vim plugin I have, and if I had just kept this one plugin around, I would keep using Vim, because this is how I've been doing all of my note-taking. So I'll just give you a brief idea of what that actually looks like. So over here, this is my Vim Wiki. Basically, it just adds like a wiki sort of thing inside of Vim. So it's similar to something like Emacs's org mode. So I can go over to my video ideas and say, okay, well, here's some of the software I want to look at, and I can go pick something from this, or I can go over to like my video notes and say, okay, well, here are my patrons, or here are my upcoming videos. Basically, it's just a way to do note-taking inside of Vim, and honestly, this plugin I find to be completely essential. Obviously, if I went over to Emacs, I could just very easily switch over to something like org mode, but while I'm using Vim, I am going to be using this plugin. And then the last two I have are pretty straightforward. So the first one is Vim Repeat, which makes it, I guess, easier to repeat some operations. Now, inside of Vim, there's already a way to repeat operations, but some plugins don't really play nicely with that, and a lot of T-Pope's plugins are specifically made with the idea of using Vim Repeat in mind. So when I want to use T-Pope's plugins, I will typically go and install this one as well, just so I can do repeated actions in those a little bit easier. And then the last one basically makes it so tables inside of Markdown don't make me want to die. So if you've ever tried to do a Markdown table inside of Vim, you would probably know that it's terrible. Yeah, terrible is the best way to describe it. So basically, this just makes it so as you're actually writing the table, it's going to, you know, auto-adjust it and automatically add lines in and just do things that make writing a table much, much easier without making the table look really, really ugly. It keeps everything nicely formatted and just makes it so much easier to work with. So I would recommend it if you're trying to do tables inside of Vim. Now, I actually did skip over one plugin, and it was actually a pretty essential plugin. So Vim Commentary, basically what this one does is it lets me do commenting really easily. So if I go and, you know, select this block here, do Control/, it will then comment it out. Or I can go and select it again, Control/, comment it out. Basically, it just makes it so commenting is really, really easy, and it works nicely with most languages. So out of the box, it'll work nicely with CSS style commenting, Java style commenting, Vim style commenting, a bunch of other commenting styles as well. So it's not like you have to go and configure it for every single file type. Most of the time, it's just going to identify it out of the box. So there is plenty more that I could have gone over in this video, but I think that might be a good stopping point. So yeah, that pretty much answers the question of what I'm actually using currently inside of my Vim config. If there's anything else you're not really sure about, if you go and say, have a look at the file and there's some lines in there, you're like, I don't know what that's supposed to be doing, feel free to jump in the Discord and go and ask me. But otherwise, I think that pretty much answers the question. So I think that is pretty much everything for me. But before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you, Joachim Corbinian, Craig, Nathan, Andrew Montazard, Joseph Peter D. Road, Tony Donald, John Michael, Spaghetti Thais, and Zilva. If you want to go support my channel, there'll be some links down below to my subscribe star, my Patreon, all of that stuff. I've also got my podcast called Tech Over Tea, available on Library, YouTube, and a bunch of other platforms as well. And the audio version for that is available basically anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Also remember to check out this channel, available on Library, BitTube, BitChute, and a bunch of other platforms as well. And remember to go smash the like button and leave me a comment down below. And remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below as well. So I think that is pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.